The GoPro evidence, what investigators want from the Maldives cave tragedy. The Maldives cave tragedy is no longer just a story about a deadly dive. It is now an evidence battle. Two countries, two investigations, one underwater cave, and one question that still hangs over everything. What really happened in the final minutes? For weeks, the public discussion has focused on the obvious failures. The depth, the cave, the lack of margin, the possibility of silt, the missing guideline, the limited gas, the difference between a normal recreational dive and a deep overhead environment. But now the investigation is moving into a different phase. Not speculation, not rumor, evidence, diving equipment, dive computers, phones, hard drives, personal belongings, and perhaps most importantly, a recovered action camera, a GoPro. If that camera recorded the descent, the route, the lighting conditions, the team's position, the moment of confusion, or the final chamber, it could become one of the most important pieces of evidence in the entire case. But that is the key word. If. At this point, no one outside the official investigation should pretend to know what the footage shows. We do not know if the camera was working. We do not know how much it recorded. We do not know if the memory card survived. We do not know if the lens was blocked by silt, darkness, bubbles, or position. We do not know if the most important moments were captured clearly. But investigators want it for a reason, because in a cave diving tragedy, every second matters. A few seconds of footage can show direction, light, visibility, team spacing, hand signals, depth, movement, panic, calm, confusion, a wrong turn, a dead end, a missing line, a silt cloud, a teammate's position, or nothing at all. And even nothing can sometimes tell investigators something. A black screen may suggest darkness, a sudden movement may suggest stress. A stopped recording may suggest impact, battery loss, flooding, or simple end of memory. A camera may not answer every question, but it can narrow the unknown. And that is why the GoPro matters. The tragedy itself was already devastating. 5 Italian divers died in the Vavu Atoll cave system. 4 of them were recovered after a difficult operation involving expert Finnish technical divers connected to the Dan Europe network. The recovery was not only difficult, it was dangerous. A Maldivian military diver, Mohammed Mahoudhi, died from decompression sickness during the search effort. That detail should never be forgotten. This disaster did not end when the first divers failed to surface. It continued into the recovery operation. It cost another life. And that shows just how hostile this environment was. This was not a simple open water accident. This was not a shallow reef emergency. This was not a situation where the surface was directly above the victims. This was an overhead environment, a cave, at depth, with complex recovery risks. Public reporting has described the dive as reaching around 50 meters, with other discussions placing the depth closer to 60 meters, depending on the section of the cave and the reconstruction. Either way, the key point remains the same. It was far beyond the Maldives' 30-meter recreational diving limit. That limit is not a suggestion. It exists because depth changes everything. Gas consumption changes, narcosis risk changes, decompression obligations change, emergency response changes, breathing effort changes, time changes. A mistake at shallow depth may allow time to recover. A mistake at 50 or 60 meters inside a cave gives almost nothing back. That is why the legal investigations matter, because investigators are not only asking how the divers died, they are asking how the dive was allowed to happen. Who knew the plan? Was the cave entry planned? Was the depth planned? Was the dive private? Was it guided? Was it authorized? Was the vessel operator aware? Were the divers properly equipped? Were regulations followed? Were limits ignored? Were there warnings? Were the dive computers and camera recordings consistent with the declared plan? Were phones or messages exchanged before the dive that show intent? Those questions are why Rome and Malay matter. The investigation in Italy is looking at possible criminal responsibility, including whether negligence or culpable homicide may be involved. The investigation in the Maldives is looking at local operations, duty of care, regulatory compliance, and the role of the vessel and dive setup. That is why evidence becomes so important. People can argue online forever. One person says it was overconfidence. Another says it was bad planning. Another says it was illegal depth. Another says it was the wrong tunnel. Another says it was silt. Another says it was darkness. Another says it was gas. Another says the operator should have stopped it. Another says the divers were responsible for their own decisions. But investigators cannot rely on comment sections. They need records. They need devices. They need timelines. They need physical evidence. A dive computer can show depth over time. It can show ascent and descent profiles. It can show how long the divers stayed at depth. It can show alarms. It can show whether decompression obligations were building. It can show whether the dive went beyond the expected plan. A GoPro can show visual context. It can show if the water was clear at entry. It can show whether the team had lights. It can show whether they entered a chamber. It can show if they followed anyone. It can show if there was a guideline. It can show if silt destroyed visibility. It can show whether the dead-end route looked like a possible exit. It can show the human reality behind the technical numbers. Phones and laptops can show planning, messages, maps, dive intentions, equipment discussions, warnings, photos, previous dive notes, coordination between team members, possible conversations with crew or operators. That kind of evidence can change a case. Because the biggest legal question may not be simply what happened underwater. It may be what was known before anyone entered the water. If the plan was declared as a shallow or standard dive, but the devices show something else, that matters. If the group intended to exceed the legal limit, that matters. If someone knew the route went deep, that matters. If the operator had knowledge, that matters. If there were warnings and those warnings were ignored, that matters. If the dive was private and outside the authorized activity, that matters too. These distinctions can shape responsibility. That is why the case is so sensitive. There is the human tragedy. There is the technical failure. There is the legal investigation. And there is the question of fairness. It is easy online to say one sentence. They should not have gone. They were too deep. One tank was not enough. No guideline means no cave. All of that may be true, but a criminal investigation has to go further. It has to ask who had what duty, who breached that duty, what rules applied, what decisions were made, what evidence proves those decisions, and whether the deaths were foreseeable and preventable. That is a much heavier question. Because if a diver makes a private, reckless decision, responsibility may fall mainly on the diver. But if an operator, guide, organizer, or authority enabled or ignored a dangerous plan, responsibility can expand. That is why the suspended license of the MV Duke of York is so important. It shows Maldivian authorities are not treating this as only an individual mistake. They are looking at the operation around the dive. A luxury live aboard does not automatically become criminally responsible because tragedy happens near it. But the operator's role must be examined. What dive was advertised? What was briefed? What was logged? What did the crew know? Who supervised? Who approved the dive site? Who checked equipment? Who monitored depth limits? Who noticed the divers had not returned? What emergency procedures existed? How fast was the alarm raised? Those are operational questions. They are also legal questions. And they are exactly the kind of questions investigators try to answer with documents and devices. Now let's talk about the cave itself. The public discussion has often centered on a terrifying reconstruction. The divers entered a system that may have included multiple chambers. They were later found clustered together in darkness inside a smaller dead-end chamber. That image is haunting, because it suggests the final problem may not have been one person alone. It suggests the group remained together. or at least ended up together, in the wrong place. That raises painful questions. Did they believe they were heading out? Did they mistake a passage for the exit? Did the shape of the cave deceive them? Did silt erase visibility? Did darkness take away the route? Did depth affect judgment? Did gas pressure force urgency? Did one diver lead and the others follow? Did they realize too late that the chamber was a dead end? No one should pretend to know those answers without evidence, but those are exactly the questions the evidence may help answer. Silt is one of the most dangerous forces in a cave. It does not need to be dramatic at first. A few bad fin kicks, a hand on the floor, a group moving through a narrow restriction, a current pushing particles into the water. Suddenly, clear water becomes a wall. Visibility can collapse. Lights reflect back. The exit disappears. The team loses reference points. And if there is no guideline, the cave becomes a guessing game. A guideline is not decoration. It is the way out when vision fails. Without it, a diver may rely on memory. But memory under stress is fragile. Inside a cave, left and right can stop meaning what they meant. Up and down can become confusing. The entrance may not look like the entrance from the opposite direction. A dead-end passage may look open until it is too late. A sandbank, slope, or restriction may create the illusion of a route. And if the team is low on gas, every wrong movement becomes expensive. This is why the GoPro question matters again. Footage might show whether visibility was still good when the wrong route was taken. It might show whether silt had already destroyed the view. It might show whether the team's lights were strong or weak. It might show if they were moving calmly or urgently. It might show if they passed a recognizable feature. It might show if they turned around too late. Or it may show none of that. But investigators will still look. Because even partial footage can help build a timeline. Now consider breathing gas. Public reporting and technical discussion have raised serious concern that the divers were using standard recreational-style equipment rather than the kind of technical configuration expected for a deep overhead dive. A single 12-liter tank at 50 or 60 meters gives very little room for error. At that depth, gas disappears fast. A diver is breathing compressed gas at much higher ambient pressure. Every minute costs far more than it would near the surface. If stress begins, gas consumption rises even faster. If a diver has to search, turn around, assist another diver, or fight a current, the gas clock accelerates. That is why technical divers plan gas brutally. They do not ask, "Can I get in?" They ask, "Can I get out if something goes wrong? Can I get out if my buddy loses gas? Can I get out if visibility becomes zero? Can I get out if the exit takes longer? Can I get out if the plan fails? Can I complete required stops? Can I survive the delay?" One tank in a deep cave does not answer those questions well. That is why so many divers reacted strongly to the reports. Not because they want to judge the dead, but because the setup described in public reporting violates the basic idea of margin. Deep cave environments demand margin. Gas margin, light margin, navigation margin, training margin, time margin. When those margins are missing, the accident may already be forming before anything appears wrong. Now add the Maldives rule. The recreational limit is 30 meters. This dive reportedly went well beyond that. That creates a legal problem and a safety problem. The safety problem is obvious. The deeper the dive, the more complex the emergency. The legal problem is whether anyone knowingly allowed, organized, or tolerated a dive beyond the permitted recreational framework. That is not a small issue. Regulations exist because tourism diving involves public safety. Operators are expected to understand limits. Divers are expected to follow them. Guides are expected to manage risk. Authorities are expected to enforce rules. When a tragedy breaks through that system, investigators ask whether the system failed too. That is where Maldivian authorities may focus. Was this an isolated, unauthorized decision? Or was there a wider culture of relaxed enforcement? Were deep dives happening unofficially? Were operators clear about limits? Were records accurate? Were guests supervised? Were dive plans checked? Was the site known to be dangerous? Were authorities aware of previous risk? These are uncomfortable questions, but after a mass fatality, uncomfortable questions are necessary. Now look at Rome's side. Italian prosecutors have a different problem. Their citizens died abroad. The evidence is physically in the Maldives. The bodies returned to Italy. The autopsies are in Italy. The families deserve answers. But the cave, the vessel, the local rules, and some of the physical evidence are under another country's control. That is why a formal judicial cooperation request matters. An international rogatory request is not casual. It is a formal process used when one country needs evidence, testimony, or legal assistance from another country. If prosecutors in Rome are asking Maldivian authorities for equipment, devices, or recovered material, it means they believe those items may be critical to the criminal case. The GoPro is not just a camera anymore, it is potential evidence. The dive computers are not just gadgets, they are potential timelines. The regulators and tanks are not just gear, they are potential proof of configuration, gas, condition, and planning. The personal belongings are not just possessions, they may connect the human story to the legal facts. That is why custody matters. Who recovered the items? When were they recovered? Where were they stored? Were they documented? Were memory cards protected? Were devices dried or preserved properly? Were chain of custody records created? Who accessed them? Could data be lost? Could footage be damaged? Could saltwater destroy electronics? Could the delay affect evidence? In a normal accident, evidence can be fragile. In an underwater cave accident, it is even more fragile. Saltwater, pressure, impact, and time can all damage devices. A GoPro may survive incredible conditions, but survival is not guaranteed. A memory card may be readable, or it may not. A dive computer may preserve data, or it may require specialized recovery. A phone may be useless from water damage, or cloud backups may provide records. Investigators will not know until the devices are examined. This is where patience matters. The internet wants the final answer now, but forensic work takes time. Autopsies take time. Toxicology takes time. Data extraction takes time. Legal cooperation takes time. Translation takes time. Cross-border evidence transfer takes time. And if prosecutors want to build a case that survives in court, they cannot rush the facts. That is why viewers should be careful with claims. Do not claim the GoPro proves guilt if nobody has released the footage. Do not claim oxygen toxicity if toxicology has not confirmed it. Do not claim murder if evidence does not support it. Do not claim one person alone caused everything if the investigation is still active. The tragedy is serious enough without inventing details. The known facts already point to a catastrophic breakdown in planning and safety. A deep dive beyond the recreational limit, an overhead cave environment, a complex recovery, multiple fatalities, a rescuer lost, investigations in 2 countries, a vessel license suspended, evidence being sought. That is enough. The responsible approach is to follow the evidence, not outrun it. So what could the final findings eventually clarify? First, the exact dive profile. How deep did they go? How long were they inside? Did the team descend directly to the cave? Were there alarms? Were there decompression obligations? Did they turn around at any point? Second, the route. Which chamber did they enter? Where did they become disoriented? Was there a false exit? Was the dead-end passage visually deceptive? Did silt play a major role? Third, the equipment. What tanks were used? What gas was inside them? Were there redundant supplies? Were there enough lights? Were there guidelines? Were regulators and computers functioning? Fourth, the planning. Who organized the dive? Who knew the intended depth? Was the cave entry planned? Was the dive recorded as something different? Were there pre-dive communications? Were warnings ignored? Fifth, the legal responsibility. Was the operator responsible? Were local regulations breached? Did anyone have a duty to stop the dive? Was the conduct negligent enough for criminal charges? These are the questions that matter now. Not because they will bring anyone back, they will not, but because answers can prevent the next tragedy. Every dive disaster leaves two legacies: the loss and the lesson. The loss belongs to the families. The lesson belongs to everyone who enters the water after them. The lesson here may be brutal. Do not treat a cave like scenery. Do not treat a legal depth limit like a suggestion. Do not enter overhead environments without a line. Do not take single tank thinking into deep cave conditions. Do not rely on clear water. Do not rely on experience alone. Do not assume the group will solve problems together if the plan is weak. Do not confuse confidence with competence. Do not let the beauty of the descent distract from the seriousness of the exit. Because in the end, the cave does not care about intention. It does not care whether the dive was meant to be quick. It does not care whether the team was curious. It does not care whether they believed they could handle it. The cave only answers to physics: pressure, gas, time, darkness, visibility, distance. And once those forces turn against a diver, the investigation begins too late. That is the hardest part about this case. The most important decisions were made before the camera ever entered the cave, before the GoPro recorded anything, before the dive computers logged the descent, before the divers reached the dead-end chamber, before the recovery teams risked their own lives, before prosecutors requested evidence. The tragedy was already being shaped by the plan. That is why the evidence matters. Not because it will create a simple villain, but because it may reveal the chain. And in diving accidents, the chain is everything. The wrong depth, the wrong equipment, the wrong environment, the wrong assumptions, the wrong route, the wrong margin, the wrong silence before the dive. If the GoPro survived, it may show part of that chain. If the dive computers survived, they may show another part. If the phones and messages survive, they may show what was known before the dive. If the autopsies and toxicology are completed, they may clarify the final physiological cause of death. And if the legal investigations continue, they may determine whether this was only a terrible mistake or a preventable crime. Until then, the most honest answer is this: we do not know everything yet, but we know enough to understand the seriousness. This was not just a dive that went wrong. It was a deep overhead disaster that crossed safety, legal, operational, and forensic lines. And now the evidence has become the center of the case. The GoPro question is not about curiosity. It is about accountability. What did the divers see? What did they do? What did they know? What did the plan allow? What did the equipment prove? And who, if anyone, had the responsibility to stop it before the cave became a tomb? Those are the questions investigators are asking now. And until the evidence is released, the only responsible thing we can do is follow the facts, respect the victims, and learn from the chain before it repeats. Because the ocean does not forgive bad assumptions. A cave does not forgive missing margins. And evidence, when it finally speaks, may be the only voice left from the deep.